Autobiography of Wilson Thompson. Chapter 1. Ancestry, Birth, Early Childhood, and Education. When the memoirs of a man are preserved in book form, the reader is very apt to inquire, of what stock or blood was he? To gratify this solicitude, I answer, I have learned that my great-grandmother was an English lady, and that she married a Welshman whose name was Jones. Whether this marriage took place before they came to America or after, I have not learned, but all their children were born in America. I have no knowledge of any more than 5 of them, and most likely there were no more. At all events, those who lived to maturity, 2 were sons and 3 were daughters. James, the eldest son, lived to old age. Although poor, he was nevertheless comfortable and respectable, and was a beloved member of the regular Baptist church for many years before his death. Thomas, the other son, became somewhat wealthy. He raised a large family and died in a good old age. He is also an esteemed member of the Baptist church. Nancy, one of the daughters, was remarkable for being a good singer and poetess, and for her knowledge in the scriptures and divine things. As a sister in a church, she was highly esteemed. She married a man by the name of Whitaker, raised a respectable family, and died in old age. The other 2 daughters, Mary and Jane, were my grandmothers, my father and mother being cousins. Mary, the elder of these 2, married a man by the name of MacDonald, by whom she had 1 son. Her husband died when she married a raw Irish Presbyterian by the name of James Wilson, by whom she raised a family of girls. These all married. Elizabeth, the oldest, married Joseph Hallman. Nancy married Charles Reynolds. Mary married William Wilson. And Rebecca, the youngest, married Gloss Thompson, my father. Jane Jones, my other grandmother, my father's mother, first married a man by the name of Lee, by whom she had a son and a daughter. The son became the celebrated Baptist minister whose praise was in many of the churches, and who was known as Elder James Lee. The daughter married Bethuel Riggs, who also became a Baptist minister of note. After the birth of these 2 children, Elder Lee died, and Jane, the widow, married Gloss Thompson, a cross blood of Scotch and German, and my father was the first child of this marriage. So, friendly reader, you see the blood of England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and Germany mingles in my veins. Yet I myself, and parents and grandparents, except my mother's father, were natives of America. All of them stood firm in the American cause during the Revolutionary struggle. After the independence of the United States was achieved, my father and his next brother, Lawrence, left their native state, North Carolina, and spent 1 year, perhaps AD 1786, as pioneers in the dense forests of Kentucky, among the wild beasts and savage Indians. I have often sat spellbound while hearing my father relate the many dangers and hair-breadth escapes of his border life, and those of the Revolution. After spending about 1 year in Kentucky, he returned to North Carolina and married Rebecca Wilson, and, shortly after, again moved to Kentucky. So in the fall of 1787, he and all his father's family, and all my mother's father's family, also came to dwell in the forests of what the Indians called the Bloody Land, where my parents passed through many of those thrilling alarms and trying private incidents, to border warfare and to the settling of Kentucky in particular. I was born the first of my parents, and my birth took place on the 17th day of August, AD 1788, in Woodford County at Hillsborough, Clear Creek. But my first recollection of anything was of Madison County, not far from Richmond, on the waters of Silver Creek. The whole family of my race, down to my own parents, generally lived to an old age. They died at ages varying from 70 to 80 years, except my father's mother, who lived 104 years. This sketch may suffice as to my blood, parentage, and my ancestors were all of the old stock of regular Baptists with few exceptions. One of my mother's sisters was a Methodist, but her father, who came to America from Emerald Isle, a Presbyterian, became a Baptist many years before his death. His father was raised and christened, as sprinkling was called in the Church of England, became Baptist before my recollection, and filled the office of a deacon from my first memory until his death, which occurred in 54th year of his age. My mother was about 4 years younger and died about 4 years after him. Now I shall proceed more particularly to narrate my own history. As stated above, I was born on the 17th day of August AD 1788, the first child of my parents. It was thought that both mother and child must immediately die. The friends were called in, and Elder James Lee, my father's half-brother, being then a young preacher, was requested to engage in prayer. During his prayer, by some special impulse access to the throne of grace, he received such full assurance that rising from his knees, he boldly said to all present that the child would be a man for God to preach the gospel of his grace. He then gave special charge to my father respecting my education. This conviction of his never subsided, but continued undiminished, and he often spoke of it to various persons and at different places, always with the same assurance. All this, however, was kept from me until after I began to preach. I was not sent to college, for I suppose my father did not feel able to send me from home and pay my board and tuition fees. As a further drawback to my education, I must add that the country being new and thinly settled, the little schooling I received was obtained by walking morning and evening over a very hilly pathway a distance of about 4 miles. By the time I was able to walk this far to school, I was also able to work at home. Father, having lost 2 tracts of land by the bad titles of Kentucky, and about this time having bought new lands in the green woods, my labor was much needed in the opening of a farm. And so, the little schooling I could get was only a few days at a time. Yet in this scattering way, I picked up a little knowledge of spelling, reading, arithmetic, and English grammar. Nothing was perfected. I acquired only a mere smattering of either. In those days, teachers had but little qualifications and were distinguished for bad habits in reading and worse, if possible, pronunciation. When I commenced preaching, I could not read a chapter nor a hymn intelligently. The little learning I have, I got by myself, without a teacher, except books, and being poor and having a family to support by my labor of my own hands, my opportunity for study and improvement was exceedingly limited, and, of course, my progress tardy. I know but little of my childhood worth recording. Neither of my parents had made any profession of vital Christianity at the period of my birth. I grew up like other, quote, backwoods, unquote, boys. In my infancy, my father and mother both professed vital religion and became members of a regular Baptist church. My father, moreover, was a deacon of the church. Among the earliest events of my recollection was seeing him pass around the bread and wine at the Lord's Supper. I have heard him and mother relate one event that was truly strange to them. It was this. My father became deeply impressed on some point of scriptural doctrine, which called up imperfectly to his memory some text and point, but the precise words and the connection of the text he could not remember. He turned to his Bible, but after a long and fruitless search for the passage, he gave it up, concluding that there was no such text. Having closed the book, he sat with it in his hands. When I came to his knees, I took the book and opened it, turning the leaves as it lay on his lap. And when I had placed my finger on a certain spot, he looked at the place, and there the long-sought text. This was when I was a little infant and had no knowledge of the use of books or letters. These, with some other similar events, I have heard my parents and relate, but all occurred before my memory, and I nothing of them until after I began to preach.